CT urography. If CT urography cannot be performed, then you can offer IVU or multi-parametric MRI to the patient. Now, if you suspected bladder cancer, then you must advise urine cytology, which is the examination for exfoliated cancer cells in the voided urine, blood, or bladder washing specimen. Remember that urine cytology has high sensitivity only for grade 3 or high grade tumor, where it has low sensitivity in low grade tumor. Thus, cytology itself used as an adjunct to cystoscopy in patient where we suspect high grade bladder tumor only. Now, due to this low sensitivity of this, there are certain urinary molecular markers that have been developed and certain even approved by FDA. But remember, none of these markers have been accepted for diagnosis or follow-up in any routine practice or in any clinical guideline. So the gold standard is cystoscopy, because the diagnosis of papillary bladder cell carcinoma ultimately depends on the cystoscopic examination and histological evaluation of the sample tissue. Remember, cystoscopy should be done as an outpatient procedure, and remember that men are usually not rigid. So in male, try to use a flexible cystoscope if available. Enhanced cystoscopy with narrowband imaging or blue light cystoscopy offer better visualization. Thus, they offer improved sensitivity and specificity for identifying bladder tumor. Now, if you see this NCCN guideline, I only emphasize only 2 points. First point is, when you suspect bladder cancer, you offer history, physical examination, office cystoscopy, cytology, imaging that should be done before considering TURBT. And during TURBT, you should perform a examination under anesthesia, bimanual examination. And in case of muscle invasive cancer, as there is propensity to distant meds, in this case, you have to offer CCT chest, CCT thorax. If the patient complain of bone-related symptoms, then whole body bone scan. So this is your metastatic and imaging workup. Pathology, I already mentioned that 90% are urothelial carcinoma. Grading is very important. Remember, both 1973 WHO grading and 2004 2016 WHO grading is nowadays. So both these grading is used. In 1973, the bladder cancer is divided into grade 1, grade 2, and grade 3. And in 2016, it is divided into papillary urothelium neoplasm of low malignant potential, low grade papillary urothelial carcinoma, and high grade papillary urothelial carcinoma. If you see this, you can see there is some overlapping between these two classification system. If you follow 1973 grade 1, you can see that now 1973 grade 1, now according to 2004, some are included into this PUN LMP group and some are included into low grade group. 1973 grade 2, some included into low grade according to 2004 2016, and some are included into the high grade group. But all grade 3 according to 1973 WHO are categorized as still high grade according to 2004 2016 classification. I repeat, both these classification are validated and both these classification are still used nowadays. Coming to the staging, 2019 TNM staging is used, and T stage mainly based on depth of invasion. So I will show you this pictorial diagram. Carcinoma C2 is a flat tumor, that is no invasion, the tumor confined to the mucosa. TI is a papillary tumor which is non-invasive. T1, when tumor involves the lamina propria or subepithelial connective tissue. When the tumor involves the muscle layer, it is T2. If involve the inner half of the muscle layer, then it is a T2A. If involves the outer half of the muscle layer, it is a T2B. If involve microscopically the perivesical adipose tissue, then it is a T3A. If it involves gross involvement of the perivesical adipose tissue, it is T3B. In male, if it involves prostate and seminal vesicle, it is T4A. In uterus and vagina involvement in female, it is a T4A. So the T stage, why this T stage is important? Because The management of bladder cancer is divided into three categories: non-muscle invasive bladder cancer, muscle invasive bladder cancer, and metastatic bladder cancer. So this TA, Ts, and T1, they are grouped into the non-muscle invasive bladder cancer, where T2 onwards they are grouped into muscle invasive bladder cancer. If patient presented with distant metastasis, then this is called as metastatic bladder cancer. So few important points about carcinoma C2. Carcinoma C2, though it is a flat non-invasive tumor, but remember it is a high grade tumor and it is always multifocal. That is, it not only present in the bladder but also can be present in the upper urinary tract, prostatic duct, and prostatic urethra also. So TURBT. So after you do a cystoscopy, you have to remove the bladder tumors for histological evaluation and management. So the goal of TURBT in early stage is to make a correct diagnosis and completely remove all the visible lesion. Now, how we measure the size of the tumor inside the bladder? It is measured by the end of the cutting loop, which is approximately 1 centimeter wide as a reference. Absence of detrusor muscle in the specimen is associated with significant higher risk of residual disease, early recurrence, and tumor under staging. Bladder biopsy. So during TURBT, you not only remove all the viable tumors, but you also take biopsies from suspected urothelium. Why? To detect carcinoma in situ. Because carcinoma in situ often presented as red velvety inflamed like area. So when you see any red velvety inflamed unhealthy area, you should take biopsy from that to detect carcinoma in situ. Mapping biopsy from normal looking mucosa is indicated if there is positive urine cytology, patient with a history of high grade non-muscle invasive bladder tumor, and tumor with non-papillary appearance. Remember, mapping biopsy taken from 6 sites, that is trigone, bladder dome, and all of the bladder wall. Prostatic urethral biopsy indication is if there is bladder neck tumor, if there is bladder carcinoma in situ. I already told you, because carcinoma in situ is multifocal and it can present in prostatic urethra also. If there is positive cytology without evidence of tumor in the bladder, and there is visible abnormality of the prostatic urethra. Second, TURBT. Second TURBT indication after incomplete initial TURBT, or there is any doubt about the completeness. If there is no muscle in the specimen with certain exception in T1 tumor. Remember, if you there is indication of second TURBT or re-TURBT, it should be performed within 2 to 6 weeks after initial resection. Importance: a second TURBT can increase the recurrence-free survival, improve outcome after BCG treatment, and provide more prognostic information. So that should be your initial approach to a suspected bladder cancer. When you detect bladder cancer, then you categorize into a non-muscle invasive, muscle invasive, and metastatic, and then treat accordingly. So natural history of non-muscle invasive bladder cancer. Though non-muscle invasive bladder cancer comprises of 70 to 80% of bladder cancer, but it has a high recurrence rate ranging from 50 to 70% after single TURBT, and 10 to 20% patient progress to higher stage of disease, that is muscle invasion, which can lead to metastasis and death. So, which are the risk factors for for disease recurrence and progression? These are the high grade tumor, T1 stage, multiple lesion, larger lesion more than 3 centimeter, presence of carcinoma in situ, more than one recurrence per year, and age at diagnosis. Now, depend on the above 6 factors, there is a sorry, there is a URTC bladder cancer calculator where you can calculate the probability of recurrence and probability of progression at 1 year and 5 years. It is very easy. So you can see this is the number of risk factors, number of tumor, diameter, prior recurrence rate, TA or Ts associated with cis or not, and grade. And according to that, you can do the scoring, and you put the score, and you can detect the probability of recurrence both at 1 year and 5 year, as well as probability of progression at 1 year and 5 year. Now there is also a Pareto risk protocol, which is a Spanish group of protocol. Now, according to this, the non-muscle invasive bladder cancer is divided into three risk group: low risk group, intermediate risk group, and high risk group. According to the EAU guideline, the low risk group, if all the feature is present, that is primary tumor plus solitary plus TA grade 1 plus size of the tumor less than 3 centimeter plus no cyst. If any of the following is present, it is high grade, that is T1 or grade 3 or carcinoma in situ or multiple plus recurrent plus large tumor TA grade 1, grade 2 tumors. Remember, if any of the tumor that does not categorized into the low risk group or high risk group, they are categorized into the intermediate risk group. There is a highest risk group, as for example, that T1 grade 3 tumor with associated with bladder cyst or prostatic urethra cyst or some urethral no common variant or presence of LVI. There are other guidelines also like NCCN guideline, NICE guideline, AUA guideline, whatever. I suggest you to remember only one guideline for your examination purpose. You can remember this EAU guideline or NICE guideline or NCCN guideline because they are more easy to remember. Now, based on this is the nutshell of management of non-muscle invasive bladder cancer. Based on this, the patients are divided into low risk, intermediate risk, and high risk. So how should you manage non-muscle invasive bladder cancer? Remember, you do a cystoscopy and you do a TURBT. Now, after TURBT, in all cases, whatever the risk factor, you should offer post-operative chemo instillation therapy, either mitomycin or gemcitabine, preferably within 6 hours, irrespective of the disease stage. Now, after 2 to 3 weeks, when you get the histopathology report and you have the cystoscopy finding, you are categorized into low risk, intermediate risk, and high risk. Remember, in low risk group, no further treatment is required. In intermediate risk group, you should offer re-TURBT if there is indication, followed by adjuvant intravesical chemo or BCG, maximum duration of 1 year. In case of high risk tumor, if there is indication of re-TURBT, then you should offer adjuvant intravesical BCG induction followed by maintenance up to the duration of 3 years. If in case of highest risk group, you should offer cystectomy. Now, why this slide is very important? Remember two things. Number one, if you offer intravesical chemotherapy immediately, that is known as SI, that is a single installation of intravesical chemotherapy immediately after post-op, it will destroy the tumor cells, ablating tumor cells, thus decreases the recurrence in all stage group. In low risk, as there is low chance of recurrence and no, that is no chance of progression, no adjuvant therapy is required. In intermediate risk group, as there is some chance of recurrence, you can offer either intravesical chemo or intravesical BCG. Remember, intravesical chemo does decrease the recurrence but cannot prevent progression. So in high risk group, as there is chance of progression to a muscle invasive disease, there is no role of adjuvant intravesical chemo. In this case, you have to offer adjuvant intravesical BCG up to 3 years. For highest risk group, you should offer cystectomy to the patient. So the options of management is this. So come to this one by one. Single immediate post-operative installation of chemotherapy, they act by destroying circulating tumor cells and thus reduces the recurrence rate compared to TURB alone. You can use any drug, either mitomycin or epidubicin or gemcitabine, because there is no randomized trial comparing individualized drug. You should give within 2 to 6 hours, preferably within 2 hours, if not possible, within 24 hours of first TURBT. Additional intravesical chemo has a role for intermediate risk patient, and you have to give this for up to 1 year. Remember, it does decrease the reduce the chance of recurrence, but it cannot reduce the chance of progression. For this, you have to give intravesical BCG. Intravesical BCG is very important for our PGTs because it comes as a short note or as a long question for both DNB and MD student. It is a live attenuated form of B. bovis It is the preferred treatment for high risk patient. I already explained why. And it is definitely is an option for intermediate risk group. It acts mainly as a immune stimulant. You have to ask the patient to empty his or her bladder. Then you should administer onco BCG 120 mg through a rubber catheter or Foley's tube for 2 hours. And every 15 hours, we have to ask the patient to change his posture, that is from supine to right lateral, then prone, then left lateral, then again supine for every 15 minutes and so on. And you should give once weekly for 6 weeks in as an induction phase. If the patient tolerates and respond to the treatment, then you can give maintenance regime for 1 year in intermediate risk group and 3 year for high risk group. And the maintenance schedule for 1 year is 3 weekly installation at 3 months, 6 months, and 12 months. So what will be like that? So first, patient came to you. If it's an intermediate risk group, give a induction weekly BCG in week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, week 5, week 6. Then at 3 months, you give intravesical BCG again at week 1, week 2, and week 3 in third month, then again 6 months, then again 12 months. For 3 year maintenance, after 12 months, it is 6 monthly. That is at 18 months, 20 months, 30 and 36 months. Optimal dose, the URTC did not find any difference in toxicity between 1/3 and full dose of BCG, but 1/3 dose BCG may be associated with higher recurrence rate, especially if given for 1 year. I already mentioned that intravesical BCG does decrease the recurrence rate comparing to TURBT or TURBT plus chemo, as well as it decreases the chance of progression. It delays and potentially lowers the risk of tumor progression. There are 10 different strains, and there is no confirmed superiority of one BCG strain over another. Definitely, BCG is more toxic than intravesical chemo, but remember that serious side effects are encountered in only less than 5% of patients and can be treated effectively in almost all cases. So, this is the EAU guideline, and you can see these are the local side effects of BCG and their management. And this is the systemic side effects of BCG and this management. What are the absolute contraindication of BCG? It is that during first 2 weeks after TURBT, patient with a visible hematuria after traumatic catheterization, and in patient with symptomatic UTI. Remember that immunocompromised HIV is a relative contraindication to BCG. It is not an absolute contraindication. So again, I repeat this management. So low risk group, single postoperative installation of intravesical chemo is sufficient. Put the patient on surveillance after that. In intermediate risk group, after single installation of intravesical chemo, either 1 year maintenance and induction and maintenance BCG or 1 year intravesical chemo. In high risk group, if it is a highest risk, offer radical cystectomy, or in case of high risk group, intravesical BCG induction followed by 3 years maintenance. So this is the management of non-muscle invasive bladder cancer. I think I am very clear. What is the indication of radical cystectomy? I already mentioned that in the highest risk group, radical cystectomy should be offered. As for example, men with carcinoma in situ involving prostatic duct and acini, pure squamous cell or adenocarcinoma histology, T1 tumor with LVSI or variant histology such as micropapillary, neuroendocrine or sarcomatoid feature, etc. Treatment of failure: if the patient fail after intravesical chemotherapy, then they can be benefited from intravesical BCG. But if a patient fail from intravesical BCG, then they are categorized into 4 groups, that is BCG refractory, BCG unresponsive, BCG relapse, and BCG intolerant. And if you see this slide, as for example, in BCG unresponsive patient, you can offer radical cystectomy with a strong evidence. What is the management of muscle invasive bladder cancer? Just remember 4 important points. First point, radical cystectomy with associated urinary diversion and lymph node dissection is the preferred treatment of choice. But if the patient is cisplatin eligible, then you should offer neoadjuvant chemotherapy to the patient, either dose dense MVAC with GCSF support or GemCis 3 to 4 cycles because it is associated with improved overall survival. Do not offer neoadjuvant chemotherapy to the patient who are ineligible to cisplatin based chemotherapy. Remember, the role of adjuvant chemotherapy has not established in the fully adequately powered randomized trial. So, ideally, NACT followed by radical cystectomy in cisplatin eligible patient should be your ideal management of choice. But sometimes some urologists are over enthusiastic and they perform radical cystectomy upfront and they then send to us for management. Remember, in this case, if patient does not receive any neoadjuvant chemotherapy and is the patient is cisplatin eligible, then in case of PT3, PT4 node positive tumor, you can offer adjuvant cisplatin based chemotherapy. If the patient does not uh, does not want surgery, or it is not a surgery candidate, then you can give a max combined modality approach, that is the maximum TURBT followed by radical CTRT. This is the management of muscle invasive bladder cancer in a nutshell. You should remember this. Now, radical cystectomy is nothing but removal of the entire bladder with adjacent organ and regional lymph node. So, what are the adjacent organs that are removed? In male, prostate and seminal vesicle; in female, uterus, cervix, ovary, and anterior vagina. Remember that lymph node dissection is essential, but the extent of lymph node dissection during cystectomy remains controversial due to conflicting RCT results. Urinary diversion may be done by incontinent ileal conduit or an orthotopic neobladder or an continent cutaneous diversion. This is the pictorial diagram that explains all this urinary diversion. You can look at this later. So neoadjuvant chemotherapy, I already mentioned that it has certain advantages. Downstaging, inoperable, operable, treat the micrometastasis at the earliest, improve overall survival, which is proved by meta-analysis. No trial showed that if you offer NACT, that will delay the surgery, and NACT does not increase the morbidity associated with surgery. But remember, you have to give to the patient who are fit for cisplatin. You cannot give chemotherapy to the cisplatin ineligible patient. Now, the advantage of NACT is proved by three meta-analysis. This is the last meta-analysis which is published in 2005, and you can see there is a clear-cut 5% improved OS in 5 years by cisplatin-based chemotherapy. Either you can give dose days MVAC or gemcitabine 3 to 4 cycles. Now, this is well summarized here. You can read this later. After that, this is the criteria for carcinoma ineligible, cisplatin ineligible. If there is creatine clearance less than 60 ml per minute, if there is CTCAE version 4 grade 2 or more audiometric hearing loss or peripheral neuropathy or class C heart failure. In this case, you cannot offer cisplatin to the patient, so you have to do a radical cystectomy there. What is the role of radiotherapy? Remember, there is no data exist to support the role of preoperative radiotherapy for operable MIBC. Do not offer preoperative radiotherapy to improve survival. Preoperative radiotherapy for operable MIBC can result in tumor downstaging after 4 to 6 weeks, but preoperative radiotherapy is not done routinely in clinical practice. So, what is the role of radiotherapy? The role of radiotherapy in muscle invasive bladder cancer is organ preservation. How do you do a organ preservation? Either one of these two. So, this is the maximal TURBT with resection of all the viable tumor if possible. Then you must offer radical CTRT to the patient. Now, this continuous course means single full course given at a 60 to 64 gray, 64 gray in 32 fraction or 55 gray in 20 fraction. This is mainly practiced in UK, in United Kingdom, where you do a continuous course of either radical CTRT 6432 or hypo 5520 55 grade 20 fraction. Then you do a repeat cystoscopy with re-TURBT after 8 to 10 weeks break. If there is residual muscle invasive disease, then you offer salvage cystectomy. If there is complete response, then you put the patient on surveillance. But in USA, they offer a split course. So initially they did a induction chemoradiation 40 to 45 day. After that, they give a 3 to 4 weeks break. Then they do a repeat cystoscopy in with TURBT. In this repeat cystoscopy and TURBT, if there is complete response, then they give a another dose boost 20 to 25 gray to a total dose of 60 to 65 gray. In this case, if there is residual invasive disease at 3 to 4 weeks, then those patients do not offer any further radiation and they offer salvage cystectomy. If there is a complete response, only then they give consolidation chemoradiation. And similar like this, they offer repeat cystoscopy after 8 to 10 weeks break. And if there is no evidence, they put on surveillance. If there is recurrence, then they offer muscle invasive disease, they offer salvage cystectomy. So what is the radiotherapy technique? Now the radiotherapy technique is not written very clear cut in Perez or Level Philip or in any radiotherapy book, but it is beautifully written in this paper. This paper published in Journal of Medical Imaging and Radiation Oncology, published in 2012. This is the Australian and New Zealand Faculty of Radiation Oncology Genitourinary Group 2011 consensus guideline. I encourage you or I advise you to please go through this paper because it is beautifully written and you have a complete idea about a radiotherapy technique in organ preservation bladder cancer. I will just copy paste these three chart and I will try to teach you about this. Remember, in when you think about radical CTRT, CT guided simulation and 3D CRT is the standard of choice. Either you treat the patient with a single phase or two phase. Remember, if there is visible tumor or the cystoscopy told you where is the exact location of the tumor, or you have more confident about delineating your GTV, only in case you treat your patient with two phase. Otherwise, you should treat the patient with a single phase technique. In single phase technique, the you should ask the patient to treat in empty bladder. If you treat in two phases, in phase one, you should treat the patient in empty bladder, but in phase two, you should treat the patient in full bladder. So the gross tumor is the residual tumor post TURB plus gross extravesical spread, that is the previous side of tumor if complete TURB. The clinical target volume is your whole bladder, including the GTB. If there is gross extravesical extension, then give an additional 0.5 centimeter margin. Remember, regional lymph node are not intentionally included. For CTB contouring guideline, contour muscle wall or bladder as a solid organ and include the anatomical variant, that is cystocele and diverticular. Use CTB above the entire treatment for one phase unless detail of tumor location available. For extravesical extension, if there is changes suspicious for extravesical extension on planning CT, give a additional 0.5 centimeter CTB margin. So when you should include prostatic urethra, that means you have to include whole of the prostate because prostatic urethra present in the prostate. So inclusion of the prostatic urethra, the indication are same for prostatic urethral biopsy, that is the bladder neck tumor, or there is carcinoma in situ, or there is multifocal tumor. If macroscopic involvement, then the prostate should be included in the CTV for the entire treatment. In female urethra, consider inclusion of the female urethra. Again, if these risk factors are present, for macroscopic vaginal involvement, include proximal urethra. Phase 2 boost, I already mentioned, and again I told you, only suitable for those when the site solitary primary is clearly identified or documented as cystoscope, because here your CTV is your GTV. That is the GTV of the side of the known tumor, adding a 0.5 centimeter margin on EV if present. Then you give a PTV. PTV should be an anisotropic margin. Cranially, you give a bigger margin 2 to 2.5 centimeter. Inferiorly, lesser margin 1 to 1.5, and others you give 1.5 to 2 centimeter margin. Just see that ensuring that precise tumor position is known for the two phases. That is very much important. Dose fractionation I already mentioned, that is 64 in 32 if you plan for a single phase. If you think for a two phase, then phase 1 50 gray in 25 fraction followed by boost to the gross tumor, that is 14 gray in 7 fraction. The OARs are rectum and femoral head, and this is the dose constant as below. So I just summarize for the PGTs. For radiotherapy planning, try to plan in a empty bladder because it's not possible most of the cases to identify the gross tumor or GTV. So try to treat the patient in a single phase. Just contour the bladder along the muscle wall. That is your CTV. Include prostate if there is indication. Then give a anisotropic margin as a PTV. Now, what is the concurrent chemotherapy that should be used? Usually doublet is preferred. That is either cisplatin 5-FU or cisplatin paclitaxel or 5-FU mitomycin. So this is the management of muscle invasive bladder cancer. I again repeat, if the patient is a surgical candidate and eligible for cisplatin, definitely give cisplatin based chemo followed by radical cystectomy. If patient does not want surgery or surgery cannot be done, then there is a combined modality of treatment. There is a maximal turbidity followed by radical CTRT, either split course or continuous course. Usually we prefer continuous course. So what is the management of metastatic bladder cancer? Again, I will take or I will utter only 4 important lines. Remember, platinum based chemotherapy is the preferred initial approach for systemic therapy in metastatic disease. If the patient does not progress after platinum based chemo, then you offer avelumab to the patient as a maintenance therapy. If the patient progress on avelumab, then you should offer pembrolizumab to the patient. If the patient again progress on pembrolizumab, then you can offer enfortumab vedotin to the patient. If you remember these 4 lines, I think it is more than enough for metastatic CA urinary bladder. Now
Devottam,
coming to this
uh,
RCC.
Devottam, I'm sorry to interrupt. This is Dr. Abhishek Basu.
Okay,
Uh,
okay.
while your presentation is excellent, I would just like to remind you that you are very near the end of your time. So it would be prudent
Okay,
if
okay.
you just,
Okay.
because you also have to cover RCC, right?
Okay. I will RCC. I will not take much more time. Just remember, this. I will not.
No, it's absolutely okay. I'm just reminding you
Okay.
the
Okay.
time.
ठीक
Okay,
है, ठीक
thank
है. So I will jump to the investigations. So remember, in RCC, you have to do a metastatic workup. For metastatic workup, contrast enhanced CT scan of chest, abdomen, and pelvic CT is mandatory. CT scan for local disease can give additional information of the local invasiveness and the eventual lymph nodal involvement and distant metastasis. MRI can give you additional information about the venous involvement and tumor thrombus. Don't offer whole body bone scan or brain MRI to the patient unless patient is symptomatic or there is raised alkaline phosphatase in routine blood test. FDG PET is not a standard investigation, in which case you should do a renal tumor core biopsy. The indication is very much clear cut. If there is metastatic disease, then you should do before starting a systemic treatment. And if you plan for ablative therapies. Now, how should you approach in a renal mass? That is beautifully summarized in DeVita. Please read this. If you suspect lymphoma or abscess or metastasis, then upfront you should offer biopsy. If the patient is a candidate for active surveillance, and if there is any clinical benefit to histological risk assessment, only in case you offer biopsy, or otherwise you should offer biopsy to the metastatic setting and in patient with ablation. Ablation therapy is planned. Management for localized tumor, just remember T1 less than 7 centimeter, partial nephrectomy is recommended. Partial nephrectomy is also recommended for compromised renal function, solitary and bilateral tumor where no size tumor limitation is there. Ablative therapy for small cortical tumor, frail patient, high surgical risk, solitary kidney, compromised renal function and hereditary RCC and bilateral tumor. Active surveillance for elderly patient with significant comorbidity or those with short life expectancy and solid renal tumor less than 4 centimeter. Tumor more than 7 centimeter, laparoscopic radical nephrectomy should be done. For T3, T4 tumor, open radical nephrectomy is the standard of care. So this is the slide. I only want to emphasize this, that the role of adjuvant sunitinib for stage 3 RCC is not well established and it is category 3. So after surgery, you should put the patient on surveillance or follow up. No adjuvant therapy is required for locally or localized RCC after nephrectomy. So this is the follow-up recommendation. Just remember, in low risk group and high risk group, the recommendation is slightly different, but you should perform a abdominal imaging and chest imaging routinely, bone scan or MRI only if the patient is symptomatic, otherwise not. Treatment of advanced or metastatic breast cancer, metastatic RCC, due to time constraint, I will only take 2 minutes. Just remember, there are two risk criteria that is used. One is MSKCC and there is a Heng et al. And according to this, the patient is divided into low risk, intermediate risk, and poor risk group according to this MSKCC. And according to this Heng et al, this is the international metastatic renal cell carcinoma. It is divided into favorable, intermediate, and poor risk group for clear cell carcinoma. The management for favorable group is slightly different, and intermediate and poor risk group, the management is same. This is the 2016 guideline. Previously, in clear cell renal carcinoma, metastatic good risk group, sunitinib and pazopanib was the drug of choice. And intermediate and poor risk group, there's a nivolumab and ipilimumab. But remember, if you follow the 2020 guideline, you can see in all risk groups, pembrolizumab and axitinib and cabozantinib with nivolumab nowadays is a category 1 recommendation, whatever the risk group, good risk, intermediate risk, poor risk. But remember, in good risk patient, you can also offer sunitinib or pazopanib to the patient. If the patient progress on TKI in clear cell carcinoma, you can advise nivolumab or cabozantinib to the patient. If the patient, as a second line, if the patient progress on nivolumab or ipilimumab, then you can either give any TKI or lenvatinib plus everolimus to the patient. For third line management, it depends on first line and second line treatment. As for example, first line TKI, second line nivolumab, you can advise cabozantinib to the patient. First line TKI, second line cabozantinib, you can advise nivolumab to the patient. First line TKI, second line TKI, you can advise nivolumab or cabozantinib to the patient. First line nivolumab, ipilimumab, and second line TKI, the option is another TKI or everolimus. For non-clear cell category, papillary, sunitinib, pazopanib, drug of choice, chromophobe variety, again sunitinib, pazopanib, everolimus is also an option. For collecting duct and medullary, the option is cisplatin-based chemo. For sarcomatide variant, this is limolumab and ipilimumab. Now that is also summarized in the NCCN. Just I want to emphasize this, that in favorable risk group, again this axitinib and pembrolizumab come into the picture in all risk group. But remember that pazopanib and sunitinib still can be given in favorable risk group. Subsequent line, the cabozantinib is preferred. This is the summary I already mentioned. Now I thank you those people for making this, helping making me my PPTs. And thank you again, ARY, for giving me this opportunity. Thank you all.
Thank you, Devottam. So our next talk, and that is on management of testicular tumors, and that will be done by Dr. Qazi Sajjad Monir. He is a consultant clinical oncologist. Dr. Qazi, the screen is yours.
Oh, am I audible?
Yeah, absolutely. Devottam, please stop sharing.
Okay, sorry.
Yes, right. So directly going to my points, like my topic of discussion is testicular tumor. So in testicular tumor, I will try to give you an overview of the like management and basic presentations. And to start with, testicular tumors are curable tumors, so have 10 years survival, more than 90%. So in testicular tumor, as it is an adolescent people tumor and the patient survives more than 10 years, so the main concern issues are treatment related effects rather than treatment itself. So it's pretty challenging, and we have to very optimize our treatment so that patient do not land up with a late complications. So in testicular tumor, it is the most common malignant neoplasm in adolescent young people, and all having like more than 90% cancer specific survival, more than 90% germ cell tumor, and more than 90% germ cell tumor testicular tumors. And the risk factors for the testicular tumor are is a family history is strongly important, and the brother with the brother of relative risk like 6.94, and even in father can also with presents with testicular tumor later on if his son is having testicular tumor. So there is a role of targeted screening. So if any family member having testicular tumor, so we have to assess the brother or any male direct blood relative. And other risk factors are cryptorchidism, hypospadias, testicular dysgenesis, Klinefelter syndrome. And one thing you try to remember, the testicular tumor itself recurs in the contralateral testis also. There is a 5% chance. And also there is a, the pathogenesis is that like testicular tumor always starts with a intratubular neoplasias or like in situ tumors. So there is a chance of in situ tumors which can progress to testicular tumor proper. Presentation. These are mainly try to remember that testicular tumor presents with dull aching pain, or the pain is very less severe or not acute like testicular torsion, but the symptoms are like testicular swelling along with a dull aching pain. The pain is not actually severe pain. So if you come up with a testicular tumor or testicular mass in your short case, try to remember to differentiate with epididymis, orchitis, hernia, torsion, hydrocele, and other varicocele and hematocele. So the main points of testicular tumor is a firm swelling, and also it does not associated with the acute pain. So if you have this kind of picture with dull aching, little dull aching pain along with the solitary tumor nodule, and USG is a must. So try to do a USG and try to call your surgeon for surgical intervention. The first primary step of treatment or workup or diagnosis is radical inguinal orchidectomy with high spermatic cord ligation. This is the main surgical technique which will be done at first if you have a solitary testicular mass in USG and likely to be testicular tumors. So don't go for any kind of transscrotal orchidectomy, because transscrotal orchidectomy it actually hampers the lymphatic circulation and patient may land up with inguinal tumor seeding. So biopsy of the contralateral testis, yes, to be done only in rare situations if there is a history of atrophic testis in the contralateral side or cryptorchidism history. And if you do a biopsy of the contralateral side, always try to remember that always you have to try to counsel the patient about sperm banking. So this is the pathological varieties of the testicular tumor. Try to remember that seminoma is the most common tumors, is 60%, and all the mixed varieties are clubbed into non-seminomatous germ cell tumor. So basically, pure form is only seminoma, and mixed variety is non-seminomatous germ cell tumors. And in non-seminomatous germ cell tumors, there are certain types of tumors like yolk sac tumor, embryonal carcinoma, so on, and also the teratoma, which are likely to be benign. Intratubular neoplasia, I mentioned that its incidence is very low, but it actually pathologically it precedes both the seminoma and non-seminoma. Seminoma is more common. Is the median age likely in the second or third decade, and IC pictures is like CLAP positive, SAL positive, and the typical variety or rare variety of seminoma I like to mention is spermatocytic seminoma, which is rarely found in the older people, and it presents with a bilateral presentation. Non-seminoma presentation is a little bit early in the second decade, and this is the golden rule that if you have a elevated alpha fetoprotein level in case of testicular mass, it's a non-seminomatous germ cell tumor. Pure seminoma don't come up with any kind of elevated alpha fetoprotein, and choriocarcinoma is a very rare kind of testicular tumors. And so, what is the spread of the tumors? The spread is like two types. One spread is direct spread, or the spermatic cord and scrotum. Scrotum is early involved if you go for a scrotal orchidectomy, And second one, the commonest one is the lymphatic. So before going to the lymphatic, I just want to show you one diagram. This is the right side of the diagram is a right testicular tumor, and left side of the diagram is for left testicular tumors. So in the right testicular tumor, the main lymphatic drainage is in the interaortocaval area of lymph nodes. So mainly these are the areas of the primary landing zone, and from there the lymph node spreads into elsewhere in retrograde in iliac lymph nodes, and sometimes in also the supraclavicular lymph nodes. In the left-sided tumor, the primary landing zone is the aortic group of lymph nodes, the PA group of lymph nodes, the para-aortic group of lymph nodes, and also try to remember that in some cases, like in 15% cases, there will be a renal hilar lymph nodes involved. So if you want to do a radiotherapy, you always have to incorporate the left renal palahilar area to address the involved lymph node areas. So this is the basic difference between the primary lymphatic drainage area of the right and left side. And for the other areas like the spread of the pelvic angular lymph nodes are very rare until unless you bridge the scrotum and until unless the patient having an extensive disease. So what about the metastatic spread? Metastatic spread, the primary metastatic areas are lung parenchyma, which is around 50% of the cases. And the hematological metastasis commonly occurs in the non-seminiferous germ cell tumor. And also the mediastinal lymph nodes are also involved. Rarely it involves liver and very rarely involves the bones and brains. Now, how to evaluate? History and physical examination I talked previously. Testicular ultrasound is a must and marker is a must. So about the markers, you always try to get the markers, post-operative markers. So post-operative markers, the alpha-fetoprotein, beta-HCG and LDH, both three are important in the post-operative phase to categorize the prognosis of the patient. And do a chest X-ray because there is a little bit of chance of lung involvement in case of testicular tumor. So chest X-ray should be done. And for the metastatic workup, the golden rule of the metastatic workup is a CECT whole abdomen. So CECT whole abdomen should be done along with the PET CT if you find a lymph node which is around 1 centimeter size and you cannot comment about the lymph node in the CT scan. You can go for a PET CT for marker positive equivocal lymph node situation. But PET CT is much more sensitive in the seminiferous germ cell tumor rather than non-seminiferous germ cell tumors. Why? Because non-seminiferous germ cell tumor are much more associated with the other mixed subtypes, like the teratomatous element. So these are lesser PET-heavy tumors. And the golden rule talk about sperm banking discussion. So if you're in a case of testicular tumors in your long case or short case in your exam, always try to remember to mention the point is sperm banking discussion is done with the patient because this is the crucial issue. With patient survives a long, and these are cases of adolescent tumors you are handling. So now the tumor markers, this chart, I think it will be sufficient for you to understand that alpha-fetoprotein in seminiferous germ cell tumors never increases. So if you have an alpha-fetoprotein level high, then stamped as a non-seminiferous germ cell tumor. And try to remember that alpha-fetoprotein and beta-HCG, both the alpha-fetoprotein level is 40% chance of getting high in non-seminiferous germ cell tumor. Beta-HCG is also 20% in seminiferous and 40% in non-seminiferous. LDH is around 60%. So LDH is much more prominent markers for that. And all these markers have a half-life around 3 days to 6 days. So if you want to do a post-operative marker study, try to do it a 7th or 8th post-operative day. And what are the importance of the markers? To diagnose, to prognosticate, and to follow up monitoring of the patient. So now staging, I'll not go into details of the staging because it's not much important other than discussion of the management is much more important. So staging is like simply the T staging is if you have a retidestis involvement and if the spermatic cord is involved, it's a T3 steadily. This is very simple one. Though before the spermatic cord is a T1 and T2, and if the scrotal involvement is a T4. So T3, try to remember T3 is spermatic cord involvement. And nodal involvement is less than 2 centimeter is N1 and more than 2 to 5 centimeters N2 and N3 is more than 5 centimeter. And for like metastasis, distant metastasis is non-regional lymph nodes M1A or lung. And now the serological serum markers, one additional thing is in testicular tumor is serum markers. So try to remember these serum markers S1, S2, and S3. These are very important to prognostic and very important for the exam also. So alpha-fetoprotein level is less than 1000, and HCG, beta HCG less than 5000, and LDH less than 1.5 times. So there alphabetically you can try to remember. A comes first, so 1000, H comes second, 5000, and LDH 1.5 times. Then try to, like in the S2, 1000 to 10,000 is alpha-fetoprotein, beta HCG 5000 to 50,000, and LDH level is like 1.5 times to 10 times. And S3 is more than 10 times. This is 50,000 and 10,000. This is very important scoring you have to remember. And don't try to remember this staging. It's a very complicated one. So I'm not straight away. I'm going to the next part. Sorry. So the treatment of the stage 1. Stage 1 means T1 to T4, N0, M0, S0. So what about the T stage? N0, M0, S0 is a stage 1. In the stage 1, the survival is very low, around 96% more 5-year disease-free survival. So the options are active surveillance or adjuvant chemo or adjuvant radiotherapy. So these are the main 3 management strategies you can have. And if we like try to see the natural history of disease of non-seminomatous germ cell tumor versus seminomatous germ cell tumor, non-seminomatous germ cell tumor actually recurs very early, and the recurrence pattern plateaus over the years. So if you go for a like surveillance, these natural history gives you an idea when to investigate. And for the testicular tumors which are seminomatous in origin, the seminomatous tumors are usually recurs few years later, like 2nd or 3rd years. So if you like try to surveillance, then these natural history is very important. I'll comment later on. Now, the risk factors for the relapse, the risk of relapse is 15%. If in germ cell tumor seminomatous variety, T size is more than 4 centimeter, radiodiastasis involvement. And for non-seminomatous germ cell tumor, this lymphovascular invasion space positive and embryonal component is present. So these are the risk factors which guides you when to treat and when to not to treat. If these are risk factors are positive, you can think of treating the adjuvant treatment. And if these are negative, you can go for like active surveillance. So if you go for active surveillance, why you are talking about active surveillance? Because as a survival rate is more than 90% in stage 1 disease, so you can put the patient on surveillance, not treating because of the to avoid like treatment related side effects. But the issue with the active surveillance is that the frequency of the investigations. So like history of physical examination, chest X-ray, these are done routinely in the early like 1 month duration in case of non-seminomatous germ cell tumor, because the chance of relapse is early in year 1. So non-seminomatous germ cell tumor should be followed up very closely. Is a 1 month interval, or you can go for a 2 monthly interval. But in seminomatous germ cell tumor, you can investigate in 3 monthly. Now, the later on, like 3 months, 4 months, or 6 months in case of 2nd year, 3rd year, and 4 to 5 years, which are similar in both case of seminomatous and non-seminomatous germ cell tumor. And now the main issue of the investigation is like CT scan. So when the CT scan to be done? CT scan to be done 3 monthly in case of 1st year, in case of non-seminomatous germ cell tumor. And look into the seminomatous germ cell tumor, as I earlier said, that the relapse rate is quite in the 2nd year, 3rd year. So the frequency of the CT scan to be done much more in case of seminomatous germ cell tumor. But the newer outlook is like to avoid as less as possible CT scan investigation, so that we can avoid the radiation exposure from the CT scan itself. So these are the newer studies going on to evaluate whether we can incorporate MRI instead of CT scan, and whether we can avoid minimize the CT scan protocol. So the active surveillance issue, main issue is that the close follow-up and the CT scan to be done, and patients should be adhered to your surveillance program. So and the other options, like you can go for active management. So when to do the active management, the risk factors are positive. So I already said the risk factors are positive. So the options for you are like for the seminomatous germ cell tumor, a carboplatin AUC7 1 to 2 cycles is sufficient, and the response rate is around 4 to the relapse rate is 4 to 5%. and you can go for a radiotherapy in the para-aortic areas, because the para-aortic areas are much more prevalent primary landing zone for the primary germ cell tumors. So the dose is around 20 gray. And in the non-seminomatous germ cell tumor, these are much more mixed variety, and these are much more aggressive and much more having nodal involvement. So the chemotherapy regime is multi-modality chemotherapy regime: bleomycin, epirubicin, and cisplatin, 1 cycle or 2 cycle. 2 cycle, 1 to 2% risk rate, and 1 cycle, 2 to 5% risk rate. And also the alternative option which was previously used are retroperitoneal lymph node dissection. Why it is obsolete now? Because retroperitoneal lymph node dissection having a lot of retrograde ejaculation issues and other primary neuropathy issues. So if you do for a adjuvant treatment for the stage 1 disease, the follow-up plan is you can go for a lesser stringent follow-up protocol, 3 to 6 monthly protocol, and annually CCT or chest X-ray program. So then the active surveillance, from the active surveillance, the adjuvant treatment option, your exposure to chemotherapy drug is there, sure, but the exposure to radiation, like from the CT scan, to be done very less frequently. Now coming into the coming into the one debate which usually we face, that which is the superior one, like radiotherapy or chemotherapy in stage 1. It has been seen from the lot of studies and the major trials that both are similar in case of contralateral testicular involvement, and also the progression-free survival and the overall survival issue. So any kind of option you can choose, like carboplatin or radiotherapy. Now the stage 2 disease means the PT any T1 to 4, and there should be node involvement whose node is 2 centimeter or less than 2 centimeter, or you can say that N1 or N2 disease, and M0 S0. So N1, N2, M0 S0, and T any kind of T disease is a stage 2 disease. In the stage 2 disease, stage 2A, the relapse rate is around 5% in the germ cell tumor, a seminomatous germ cell tumor, and the radiotherapy is the primary treatment modality in case of stage 2A. Stage 2A means the node size is less than 2 centimeter. Why the radiotherapy is important in seminoma, testicular seminoma? Because seminoma inherently responds very well with radiotherapy rather than non-seminomatous germ cell tumor. So the radiotherapy is a part and parcel of the early, like stage 2A tumors. So dose is around 30 gray. And what would be the target? Target is the para-aortic node, the primary landing zone, and the ipsilateral iliac lymph nodes, the secondary landing zone. So in the stage 2A, and the 2B, as the 2B's node size is 2 to 5 centimeter. So it has been seen that in the stage 2B, there is a chance of nodal involvement, and nodal recurrence is very high. And it has been seen that bleomycin, epirubicin, cisplatin, 3 cycles chemo is much more superior than radiotherapy nowadays. Previously, radiotherapy was a main treatment modality, but you can go for radiotherapy also, because if the patient is contraindicated for chemo, and also if the patient is contraindicated for bleomycin, you can go for epirubicin or cisplatin. So now the non-seminomatous tumor. Non-seminomatous tumor, basically non-seminomatous tumor are small. If the nodes are very small, you have to confirm with the biopsy, because these kind of mixed variety or benign histologies are associated with the non-seminomatous germ cell tumor. So to categorize the lesion, if the lymph nodes are very small, try to get a biopsy confirmation so that to categorize the stage. And BEP is much more superior in case of non-seminomatous germ cell tumor. Radiotherapy is not the primary line of treatment here, because non-seminomatous germ cell tumor responds very well with chemo rather than radiotherapy. So if you go for a bleomycin, epirubicin, cisplatin, it has been seen that recurrence-free survival is 98%. Sometimes if the nodal residual disease, you can go for a additional retroperitoneal lymph node dissection, or you can go for a retroperitoneal lymph node dissection followed by epirubicin, cisplatin, which were used previously. Nowadays, chemotherapy is a main treatment modality in case of non-seminomatous germ cell tumor stage 2. And follow-up is like a routine follow-up is CECT abdomen and thorax and serum markers. These are very important. And in the follow-up study, if you get a residual mass more than 6 centimeter and with a normal serum marker, try to evaluate with the PET CT. primarily in case of seminiferous germ cell tumor, because these can be residual disease. Or if 1 centimeter more than size is 1 centimeter, in case of non-seminiferous germ cell tumor, you can also go for a biopsy from that lesion. So if the PET positive residual is there, you can think of having second line chemo. So and for the metastatic disease, like stage 3 onwards, both all are metastatic disease. So categorize the metastatic, you have to categorize the metastatic disease. Risk grouping is very important, and try to remember the risk grouping is very important for exam and very important for treatment decisions also. So there are good risk and intermediate risk for seminiferous germ cell tumor, and poor risk also for the non-seminiferous tumors. For the good risk category, like the good risk category in seminiferous germ cell tumor, the primary is any, and normal alpha fetoprotein, and any kind of beta ECG or LDH level. So normal alpha fetoprotein, any beta ECG, any primary tumor. These are non-seminiferous germ cell tumor. Apart from all other categorized into intermediate groups. So try to remember this: any primary normal alpha fetoprotein with any other markers. These are good risk categories. So there should be no non-pulmonary visceral mets also, because non-pulmonary visceral mets is a poor risk category. So non-pulmonary visceral mets with without any non-pulmonary visceral mets, any kind of primary origin, mediastinal, retroperitoneal, or testicular with a normal alpha fetoprotein level, beta ECG level, or LDH level, any, these are is the good risk. The overall survival is 85%. And if non-pulmonary visceral mets is present, this is intermediate risk. So in seminiferous germ cell tumor, there is nothing called poor risk, because all the risk categories are like the disease itself. Generally, it's a good risk tumors. In non-seminiferous germ cell tumor, there are 3 varieties. One is good, intermediate, poor. Poor is no non-pulmonary visceral mets, along with testicular or retroperitoneal primary, and S1 serology pattern, which I discussed previously. Intermediate risk, the primary pattern is same, plus no non-pulmonary visceral mets with S2 category. So the difference between this good and intermediate in NSGCT is S1 and S2. S1 is good and S2 is intermediate. And apart from S1, the good and intermediate all are in poor category. So mediastinal primary and non-pulmonary visceral mets and S3, both 3 are in poor category. So these are the risk categorization of these tumors. So standard treatment of metastatic disease is good risk category, BEP 3 cycles in non-seminiferous germ cell tumor, or BEP 3 cycles or 84 cycles in the SGCT tumors. And intermediate is BEP 4, poor is BEP 4. And also, so try to remember, like good risk category, BEP 3 cycles, and intermediate poor risk category, BEP 4 cycles. So other regimes are like vinorelbine, vinblastine, ifosfamide, and cisplatin. These are 4 cycles. You can give up if the bleomycin is contraindicated. And in poor risk category, you have to evaluate the serum markers 2 cycles later on. And if the serum markers are raised, you can think of having the poor responder. So you can change your regime to VIP regime or other salvage regimes. And one thing is that cisplatin is very crucial. So avoid carboplatin until and unless required. And in poor risk category, there is no advantage of giving higher dose intense regimes like VIP until unless bleomycin is contraindicated. So these are the dose schedules, and try to remember the dose schedules, which are very, very important for your exams. And those schedules are very important. And for like chemotherapy protocol, in case of testicular tumors, always try to have a chest X-ray and pulmonary function test to avoid to assess bleomycin, because bleomycin is very important to having 2 kind of toxicities. One is skin rash, as you mentioned, is a whiplash rash and flagellate erythema. These are the typical rash found in the BEP regime patients, and also the pulmonary involvement in case of bleomycin pulmonary fibrosis. So always try to have a pulmonary function test, which are important, DLCO and VC. These are both important. Try to have this before and after your chemotherapy regime. So key issues for the treatment of testicular tumors and also for any curative tumors, try to treat with the full dose. Don't try to give an inadequate dose, because it's a criminal negligence. So try to give a full dose of in case of even with the GCSF support. Inadequate dosing in case of curable tumor is very non-advisable. So try to do the full dose and try to monitor lung toxicity and try to monitor magnesium and calcium level if you're giving cisplatin. So how to follow up? Like follow up is 8 weeks later on. You can go for a imaging, preferably in germ cell semi-numerous germ cell tumor. PET-CT can be preferred if your initial CT scan shows more than 3 centimeter mass. So and non-semi-numerous germ cell tumor, PET-CT don't have any kind of extra advantage because of mixed variety of tumors. So initially do CT scan and later on do a PET-CT if required. And in non-semi-numerous germ cell tumor, if the residual is there, you can go for a surgical biopsy confirmation. So these are the salvage chemotherapy categorization of the tumors. I am not going into details of the salvage protocol because these are the scoring criteria for the salvage, how much of response, how much the interval between the primary treatment and the hormone the levels. So the second line chemotherapy regimes are conventional dose of taxane, ifosfamide, platinum, which are very toxic in terms of bone marrow toxicity and hemorrhagic cystitis. And if you tend to avoid TIP, you can go for a gem-paclitaxel, which is a lesser amount of toxic, but lesser efficacious also. And other options are like surgery, radiotherapy, palliative one, and oral like metronomic chemo, like oral etoposide. 30% case can be salvaged. The real challenge are the patient which have relapse in the later on phase with a benign kind of relapse. So sometimes seminoma also recurrence, having recurrence with non-seminomatous also. So you can get a teratomatous relapse later on in case of seminomatous germ cell tumor also. So a little bit of radiotherapy. Radiotherapy is very important in case of seminomatous germ cell tumor. And for radiotherapy, sperm banking and the testicular shield is very important because these are the two areas which are come into very close of your radiotherapy portal areas. So these are the testicular shield previously used in the 2D era, and these are called clamshell shield. You can get a clamshell shield instrument in your exam also. And the testicular dose is much more reduced in case if you use a testicular shield, which is made up of lead, which is the kind of coconut ball or kind of thing. So the 2D in stage 1 disease, we want to treat the PA node. The PA node treatment is very simple. You only classically T9 to T10 vertebra level to L5 to S1 level. You have to laterally. These are extended up to the transverse process. So these are the area of the PA node treatment. The dose is 20 gray and 10 fractions. If you have the left testicular tumor, if you have a like excess simulator, you can include the left renal hilum also to include renal hilum also, so that the renal hilum lymph nodes are incorporated. So we can also block the other areas to avoid the unnecessary radiation in these other areas. And the 3D technique is very simple. You have to contour like aorta and IVC nodes, just like, and also other only the aorta, pre-aortic and para-aortic lymph nodes. And one thing is a stage 2 disease. One thing I want to mention this earlier, there is a 2D era. The stage 2 disease were treated with a classical dogleg field treatment, which is the classical dogleg field radiotherapy. Dogleg field, in the picture, you can have an idea that like ipsilateral iliac lymph nodes and para-aortic lymph nodes. These are the target areas. So this looks like a dogleg. So these are called a dogleg field. So the 2D in the X-ray simulator based 2D planning, you can also block the other part of the area in your field. So this is the basic technique. If you want to have a 2D treatment in RPG days, we need to treat with this kind of block arrangements in the 2D treatment with the dogleg field. So these are the block placement, and so that we can have a dogleg field arrangements. And the 3D is pretty easy. You have to contour the para-aortic nodes and the pelvic lymph nodes. The target areas are common iliac, extra-iliac, and the proximal inter-iliac. The contouring guidelines similar in the other pelvic tumors. And in the extended dogleg field, this is also important previously. So when extended dogleg fields are used, extended dogleg field means you have to incorporate the inguinal lymph nodes also. When to incorporate inguinal lymph nodes? If there is a inguinal lymph node positive, number 1, or inguinal incision is there, like inguinal surgery, history of inguinal surgery. So these are the situations where you have to include the inguinal lymph nodes. And also previously we used to treat the 2B or 2C cases where the bulky lymph nodes like node size 5 centimeter to treat with the inverted Y field. Inverted Y field means bilateral pelvic lymph node along with the PA field. So it's a kind of Y in opposite direction. But nowadays, chemotherapy replaces RT, so don't avoid chemotherapy. So we avoid RT. Chemotherapy will sufficient in this case of bulky lymph node disease. And IMRT is much more superior in case of terms of toxicity and radiation exposure to other areas. So nowadays, IMRT is very good kind of tool to avoid the radiotherapy technicalities. So testicular dose is very important in case of wear constraint. So 0.5 gray is the dose limiting dose for temporary agiospermia, and try to limit your dose 0.5 gray to 1 gray in case of testis. So treatment sequel, this is very important. Cardiac late effects, yes, it occurs in the later on phases, and 7-fold increase in the severe disorder due to cisplatin, and also the lipid disorders are also important. And hypogonadism is very crucial issue. And hypogonadism, it has been seen that 81% cases have a hypogonadism issue in surveillance protocol. Why? Because there is a lot of exposure of repeated CT scan imaging in case of surveillance program. So that's why currently MRI is incorporated in case of the research is going on to incorporate MRI. And interestingly, the lesser amount of infertility issues are with chemotherapy, like 62%. So in the higher stage of disease, we usually prefer chemotherapy to avoid radiotherapy. And always try to have an idea that sperm banking and testosterone supplementation are very good, important part and parcel of your long-term management. And ototoxicity is very important. Cisplatin is ototoxicity, have a permanent ototoxicity. 20% patient have, and 20% patient have a sensory neuropathy also. They are painful sensory neuropathies. And the treatment options are very much non-effective in case of these kind of neurotoxicities. So why this is important? Because patient survives more than 10 to 15 years. So you can come up with this kind of toxicities in your later follow-up phases. As secondary malignancy, I want to mention this is very, very important. These are much more important because patients are exposed to the etoposide. So it has been seen that etoposide 3 to 4 cycles gives a recurrence rate of around 1%. The acute leukemia occurs 3 to 4 cycles. The acute leukemia relative risk is around 1%. If you go for more than 4 cycles, the acute leukemia chance is more than 6%. So this is the very crucial part. And the other testicular tumors, I'm not going into the details of these tumors. You can come up with a lymphoma commonly, and lymphoma treated with very kind of normal lymphoma strategies, along with prophylactic CSI if needed in other cases. So these are the other tumors like stage-4 gonadal tumors and granulosa cell tumors. These are treated along with the line of germ cell tumors, but these are very, very lesser in rare in variety. So one thing I want to mention is for the testicular germ cell tumor, always try to remember that full dose chemotherapy or full dose radiotherapy is very much important, and try to address the long-term side effect issue very stringently, and try to think of sperm banking for the adolescent people. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kazi. That is a nice and lucid talk on testicular cancer. So heading to our last talk for today's topic, and that is on prostate cancer, management on the prostate cancer, and that will be done by Dr. Kaustubh Majumdar. He is a consultant clinical oncologist in CNCI, Kolkata. Kaustubh?
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Is it visible?
Yeah, it's visible. You can carry on.
Okay, thank you, Yadai, for giving me the opportunity for presenting on the clinical oncology modules. And today, my topic of discussion is the management of the prostate cancer. So I'll start from a case basis. So it is a 62-year-old male patient come with a history of increased frequency of urination and hesitancy for the last 8 months. He is hypertensive, having type 2 diabetic mellitus, and the patient is reviewed in the local hospital, and some general physician has done the PSA, and it's come out to be 16 nanogram per ml. Now, such type of patients normally come to you for the further investigation and the management of the patient. So what should be done in those cases? So from this history, you might predict that it might take a case of might be a case of a CA prostate or something. So we're going to discuss something about the prostate cancer and come to the case one by one. So, and now coming according to the Globocan data 2020, prostate cancer is the third most common cancer, and it is the second most common cancer in male after the lung cancer. And but in India, the incidence is not that much, but yes, it is increasing day to day. There are various etiology, for example, family history, hereditary association, environmental factor, diets are there for the causative of this prostate cancer. But one of the important is that there's alteration of the homologous recombination of the DNA repair gene, such as BRCA1, 2, ATM, such type of genes are there, which might cause the prostate cancers. So what is the anatomy of prostate? It is prostate is a walnut-sized gland located in the front of the rectum below the bladder. Blood supply from the inferior vesical artery and nerve supply from the neovascular bundle. It's present on the either side of the prostate, and it's derived from the pelvic plexus S2 to 4 and T10 to T12 station. And if you can divide it according to the zone, it is divided into the peripheral zone, transitional zone, central zone, and anterior fibromuscular stromal zone. So normally prostate cancer happens from the peripheral zone. So you can see here where this prostatic urethra is there. So around it, there is a central zone. It is depicted also in the MRI here. You can see the central zone here, the two peripheral zone here. And in the sagittal section, if we can divide it in between the base, mid prostate, and apex. So symptoms are obviously depending from where this cancer has been arised, but mainly it is from the peripheral zone. Again, what is the lymphatic drainage? Lymphatic drainage is on the pelvic, hypogastric, obturator, iliac, and sacral. These are all the local lymph node stations. But when it is going to the other lymph nodes, it would call the metastatic lymph node, and in staging it is M1A, for example, aortic, inguinal, supraclavicular, cervical. These are all the metastatic, that is M1A in the staging. Now the clinical manifestation. The clinical manifestation, depending, again, I am telling you that from where it is coming. So if it is in peripheral zone, then it is a very less chance initially to affect the prostatic urethra. So main early stages in the presentation is totally asymptomatic. But when it is locally advanced stage, then various prostatism symptoms are there. For example, obstruction symptom. There is some hesitancy, intermittency in the urinary stream, decreased force of stream, retention of the urine, hematuria might occur. And you must know that the most common site of the metastasis in the bone, and least common site is the brain. So even patient might present to you with a pain in the back. You might find in MRI there is some vertebral lesion is there, and on subsequent investigation you might find that there is a prostate cancer. So patient might present with a metastatic disease, and it is very common in our country, in India. So how you do diagnose the previous case, what I am already told, how do you proceed for it? So first is the sign and symptom. Obviously the sign or symptom of prostatism is there, and there are something other things. For is the important is the serum PSA. So in the index case, the serum PSA is the 16 nanogram. So what is PSA? PSA is a serine protease glycoprotein is secreted from the prostatic epithelium. So normal is then less than 4 nanogram per ml. But it is some age specific issues are there. But okay, 4 is the more or less cutoff in the prostate cancer management purpose. And its sensitivity is 85%, but specificity near about 65 to 70%. One thing important here, the PSA density. The PSA density is calculated by the total PSA divided by the prostatic volume. Second most important is the DRE, that is the digital rectal examination. So it is done by in the lithotomy position or in the left lateral decubitus by the pararectal examination. You might find a hard nodular asymmetric, may or may not be raised. it is seen that the DRA plus PSA, its specificity is near about 87% of detecting the prostate cancer. But one thing you should mind that PSA should be done before the DRE, because where you are handling this prostate, there might be a chance of false positivity, that is false increase of the PSA. It might even occur when you are giving a Foley's catheter due to some obstructive features to the obstructive features. So don't go if you go for a emergency Foley's catheterization, then don't go for the PSA just on the next day. You wait for at least 3 to 4 weeks, then go for the PSA examination. So this is a NCCN guideline in case of the 45 to 75 years old, which is more than 45 years old, who are the more risks of the prostate cancer. If you find a PSA is less than 1 nanogram, then you have to repeat testing in the 2 to 4 years interval. And if the PS is 1 to 3, then you have to repeat test 1 to 2 year interval. And if the PS is more than 3 and the DRA is suspicious, then you have to go for further diagnosis. So further diagnosis, how could it be done? It is done by the prostatic biopsy. So in the prostatic biopsy, it is something different from the other type of biopsy, because it is TRAS-guided biopsy. The transrectal ultrasound-guided biopsy is done here. So here it is called the sextant biopsy. That is from the 6 cores, the biopsy has been is taken. So as I already mentioned, it is divided by the base, mid prostatic tissue, and apex. And if you divide it into right and left, from the each core, the biopsy have to be taken. But it is some ancient value. Nowadays, 10 to 12 cores or double sextant biopsy is used. So here you can see that from the 12 sides, the biopsy has been taken. It has been divided in the left, in the apex, left apex, L1A, L1-2, L1-1 and L1-2, and the right apex, left base, right base, and the left far lateral, right far lateral, 1 and 2. So by this way, you have to normally the radiologist taking the biopsy. So biopsy has been done. So you have got some histopathological diagnosis from here. So it is seen that 95% of this prostatic is developing from the assignee of the prostatic duct, and it is an adenocarcinoma. 5% are the other types, for example, small cell mucinous to neuroendocrine, whatever might be. Now, what you will see in the pathological report, you have to see the Gleason's pattern. So Gleason's pattern is nothing but according to the in the microscope, regarding the glands and the stromal differentiation, it has differentiated into the 1 to 5, where 1 and 2 is the well differentiated, 3 is the moderately differentiated, and 4 and 5 is the poorly differentiated. So so you have taken from the 12 sites, and 12 core biopsy have been taken. So from there, the most prevalent one is called the primary pattern, and the second most common prevalent one is called the secondary pattern. Suppose in this case, you have seen that total 10 core has been taken. Most common pattern is the 3. So 3 is the primary pattern, 3. And the second most common is the 4. So 4 is the secondary pattern. So 3 plus 4 is the Gleason's score. But if the 4 is here, I mean 4 plus 3 is here, is there any difference in the prognosis? Yes, there is difference in the prognosis. What is that? It is seen that the Gleason's score 4 plus 3 is more aggressive than 3 plus 4. It is seen the larger tumor volume is there, higher PSA level, and the older age is there. So Gleason's score is important. More important is the pattern, what is primary and the secondary pattern. So what are the other investigations? MRI pelvis, CT scan abdomen, bone scan, and the PET scan, PSM and PET scan. MRI pelvis is multi-parametric MRI to be done, where the T2 weighted images along with other DWI image and dynamic contrast image should be added along with it. Endorectal coil should be placed during this MRI for the MRI. And in the MRI, you might find the invasion to the neurovascular bundle, find some EC, that is extracapsular extension, seminal vesicle involvement can be taken. PET scan, one thing you should keep in mind that FDG PET, that is F18 fluorodeoxyglucose PET scan should not be routinely used, because it is not sensitive for the prostate cancer. Rather, gallium-68 PSMA PET, C11 choline or F18 fluorocarbon plate can be done in case of the prostate cancer. But in what stage, in what risk group, I am coming one by one. So if we can see the staging of it, I'm not going to the details of the staging. Rather, I would say that in the pathological T1, in the T1, there is no pathological T1 classification. All things by the biopsy only, clinical, and as well as radiological obviously. And another thing is that you can see that M1A here, the non-regional lymph node, I have already told you that aortic lymph node or inguinal lymph node are considered as a M1 disease in this here. M1B is the bone and M1C the other bone metastasis. Now, when the prognostic staging is there, you will find one grade group. So the grade group is that when it's combined with Gleason score and Gleason pattern. You can see that Gleason grade group 1 is the 6, less than equal to 6, 2 and 3 is the 7, according to the 3 plus 4 or 4 plus 3, and Gleason group 4 and 5 is there according to 8 and 9 and 10. And another important that the classification applies to the adenocarcinoma and the squamous cell carcinoma, but not the sarcoma or transitional cell carcinoma. So according to this, all these things, we classified according to the Briggs classification. It is a very low, unfavorable, favorable intermediate, unfavorable intermediate, high, and very high. So in the very low, you should go for the multiparametric MRI only along with prostate biopsy. Low, you have to go the same thing. I'm not going to the details of what is very low or low, but you can easily see that grade group 1, PSA less than 10, low T1A or T2A, it is considered for the low group. In the intermediate group, there are some risk factors by which it can be divided, and it is divided between favorable intermediate and unfavorable intermediate. You must know that in unfavorable intermediate, you have to go for the pelvic along with abdominal imaging. Along bone imaging is plus minus, you might go for or might not. But from the unfavorable intermediate, you must go for the bone imaging. But in from the high risk group, you have to go for the bone imaging, pelvic, abdominal imaging along with this multiparametric MRI and the biopsy. So the treatment is somehow different from the other type of cancer because of some factors. For example, the natural history of the disease, prognostic significance of the disease, potential therapeutic benefit of the various modalities, immediate and late treatment sequelae, and also the life expectancy. That is important. So as the prostate is a very slow growing tumor, so here the one of the important treatment, you must say not the treatment, one of the management modality is the observation versus active surveillance. Other modalities might be the radical prostate surgery, radiotherapy, chemotherapy, and hormonal therapy, and the targeted therapy. So what are the active surveillance and what is observation? This is one of the most important modality of the management in prostate cancer. Both involve, that is active surveillance and observation, both involve the not more than every 6 month monitoring. Active surveillance involves surveillance with multiparametric MRI and the prostate biopsy, but observation is just to observe. So in which cases the active surveillance have been done? Very low risk prostate cancer having life expectancy more than 20 years, low risk prostate cancer life expectancy more than 10 years. But if you find some evidence of progression, that will prompt you to conversion of the potentially curative treatment. So how would you predict that the cancer is progressing? So you might go for a Gleason's grade 4 or 5, or prostate cancer found in the greater number of the prostatic biopsy. Because in the active surveillance, you must go for a PSA, not often than 6 months, DRE, not often than 12 months, prostatic biopsy, not often than of 12 months, and as well as the prostatic MRI. So if you find this thing, that is the Gleason score 4 or 5 in the biopsy, or more greater number of the prostatic biopsy, then you might go for a active management of the patient. Observation should be done in the low risk category with life expectancy less than 10 years. Observation monitoring should be continued until there is sudden increased PSA, or there is a change in the examination pattern or something. So in those cases, you might go for a palliative ADT, that is the androgen deprivation therapy. Surgery, it is one of the important modality in the not in the local advanced, but in the early group. And the complete removal of the prostate surrounding capsule, seminal vesicles, ampulla, and the vas deferens to be done. But one thing, the also incision have been mentioned, or other ISMO guidelines have also mentioned that the surgery should be practiced in the high volume center where the complete exercise surgically is possible, where the surgeons are expertise to remove the prostate day by day. So a patient have to be taken care of where their life expectancy is more than 10 years and there is no serious comorbidity of the patient. And approach is the retropubic, transparent, and the laparoscopic approach. It is the pure and robot assisted. I'm not going to details of the of it. And the lymph node dissection is the lymph node dissection, and the extended lymph node dissection is there. Pelvic lymph node dissection is excluded in the patient of more than where the less than 2% of the nodal metastasis chance is there. So how could you predict it is? It is predict from various nomogram. One of the important nomogram in the Sloan Kettering nomogram you might see in the website from this website. So surgery related to the prostate cancer, other type of surgery is the salvage radical prostatectomy, where the highly selected patient with the local recurrence after the EBRT brachytherapy can be done, where there is no metastasis is there. But in those cases, morbidity obviously high. Channel TURP, there is another part of the surgery is there. Not the surgery, you might say that when there is an obstructed feature, the patient is dependent on this Foley's catheter to decrease the dependence. You go for the urologist go for the this channel TURP to for the normal passage of the urine. And bilateral osteotomy is there, but I'm not going to details. I have to go in the ADT in the latter. So radiotherapy is one of the important modality. It might go in adjuvant setting, you might go for it, in radical, in salvage radiotherapy, and also the palliative. Architectic, here all the same from the beginning of the 2D to the proton area. Proton is one of the important modality in the prostate cancer, though it is not FDA approved. Brachytherapy, interstitial brachytherapy is by HDR brachytherapy and LDR by permanent seeds. I'm going to quickly to the details of the some conventional plan in the AP view. In the orthogonal X-ray, in the AP view, the superior border to be L5, L1, inferior border is the lower border of the ischial tuberosity, lateral border is the 1.5 centimeter lateral to the this bony pelvis. In the lateral view, the anterior margin is the 1.5 to 1 centimeter posterior to the cortex, and the posterior margin is the S to ST interspace. And upper and lower border is similar to that of the AP view. In the boost field, superior border is the top of the acetabulum, 3 to 5 centimeter above the pubis. Anterior border is the 1.5 centimeter behind the posterior to the anterior margin of the pubic symphysis. Posterior border is the 2 centimeter behind the rectal marker. It has been placed during the taking the orthogonal X-ray, and laterally include the 2/3 of the obturator foramen. So nowadays, as our all the maximum centers are equipped with this IMRT and this 3D CRT, so normally in the prostate cancer, it is detrimental to use the conventional planning. So in the virtual simulation, it should be done in the bowel and bladder protocol, where the bladder, if it is normal bladder protocol is used according to your institutional protocol, and patient positioning mainly in the supine, thermoplastic mold device can be used. Virtual simulation, CT simulation to be done, and after the simulation, when patient registration to be done, you have to fuse the CT scan with MRI, because you might not find a proper delineation of the prostate when you are going to contour only in the CT. So MRI fusion should be done. A very quick target volume in the low risk prostate without proximal seminal vesicles is being used. In the intermediate risk, prostate with SV have to be taken. In high risk, you have to from the unfavorable intermediate groups, you have to take prostate, seminal vesicle, and the pelvic lymph node. Where is the urinary bladder, rectum, small bowel, and the femoral head? Prostate having, as you are giving a prostate is a very high dose, so target motion management should be done. Daily localization of the image guided radiotherapy to be done. It should be done by inserting a fiducial marker. Better if you insert a gold fiducial inside the prostate, and according to its movement during the everyday CBCT or everyday CBCT, you might find some displacement of the prostate, and you have to negate it, you have to match it, and then treat it. So intrafraction and intrafraction movement of the prostate is very important. So target tracking is by ExactTrack or any other tracking device might be beneficial. And before RT, you might go for a onboard imaging. So what might be the dose? Dose is the in the conventional fractionation 1.8 to 2 gray from 37 to 45 fraction. That is, it is said that the in low risk you might go for a 74 to 76 gray in conventional fractionation, but in intermediate to high risk more than 78 gray of the dose in conventional fractionation should be done. But nowadays the moderate hyperfractionation and ultra fractionation is very useful. In moderate hyperfractionation, 33 gray in 25, that is 60 gray in the 20 fraction is one of the important, and ultra hyperfractionation with the XBRT 6 gray in the 6 fraction is nowadays used in some centers. So why the this moderate hyperfractionation or ultra hyperfractionation is beneficial? Because as we all know that prostate cancer is a very slow going tumor having a alpha beta ratio is less than 1.5 gray. So it is lower than that of the other late reactive tissue, that is the rectum, urinary bladder. And a quick discussion on the radiobiology, that the lower the ratio of this alpha beta, greater the effect on the normal and the malignant tissue on the change of the fraction size. So if the small change in the fraction size, relative large change in the effect of the radiotherapy occur when there is a low alpha beta ratio. So low alpha beta means the beta cell kill is more. So in the high dose, if we apply, the more is beta cell kill and more in the tumor tissue destruction is there. So if the cancer is treated with a fraction size greater than 2 gray, the ratio of the, that is the therapeutic ratio, is increased in the prostate cancer and always obviously in the breast cancer. So there are some side effects also. For example, acute lower GI toxicity in the acute effect, and the chronic radiation sickness and the proctitis is one of the important and the detrimental side effect in the after the 6 months of the treatment. So if we can decrease the BED, as I have already mentioned that hyperfractionated treatment is an important modality, you can see that in 60 to 20 fraction of the tumor, the BED for late toxicity is 120, where then the conventional is a 130. So hyperfractionated tumor is very beneficial regarding the therapeutic ratio. So here the some the DVH criteria. I'm going to details of it. Coming to the this brachytherapy, interstitial implant, the permanent LDR with some seeds are used. The MIG applicator device are used, and here you can see that various small seeds are placed inside the prostate, and from there the radiation emits and the prostate cancer and it's treated. Second is the interstitial implant by the HDR iridium treatment by lithotomy position using various template. You might insert needle as we are doing the cervix brachytherapy, not routinely used in the prostate. So brachytherapy, monotherapy, there you can in the LDR used iodine sheet, palladium or cesium sheet. In HDR, that's the iridium 192 pellets are used. And when it is used along with EBRT, obviously the dose is less. After 45 to 50 days, you have to add LDR or HDR brachytherapy. But in our country, the LDR sheets are not not routinely used, even not in TMH. Now coming to the one of the important part is the hormonal therapy. So hormonal therapy is the prostate cancer, the hormone dependent cancer, as we all know. So from the hypothalamus, the GnRH release, it acts on the pituitary, it's release the LH, acts on the adrenal gland as well as testis to produce testosterone, and which affect the increase the prostatic hyperplasia. So we have to reduce the testosterone level for the hormonal treatment. Along with it, the prostate requires the androgen hormone, that is this testosterone. And testosterone, not only the testosterone, but which the testosterone which converted into the dihydrotestosterone by the 5-alpha reductase. This 5-dihydrotestosterone has a 5 times more potent than that of the testosterone to act on the androgen receptor which present intracellularly. Okay, so what happens? The testosterone converted to the dihydrotestosterone acts on the androgen receptor, and internalization of the androgen receptor occur, which cause change in the DNA sites and increase the growth and survival. So this is the mechanism by which from cholesterol, that is the precursor of it, the testosterone have been produced by various enzymes. This mechanism is not only in the testis itself, in the lady cell itself, but also in the adrenal gland. this mechanism sounds clear. So this mechanism is important because when we are going to treat the prostate cancer, we might going to affect the various enzymes to inhibit the various enzymes in these algorithms. So the androgen deprivation therapy, our goal is ultimately to lower the testosterone level in the castrate level. What is the castrate level? Is the less than 50 nanogram per DL or less than 20 nanogram or 1.7 nanomole per liter. So how could you go for the androgen axis block? The androgen axis ablation done by the bilateral simple orchiectomy, it is a very effective procedure, rapid and very low cost. Previously, hypophasectomy or adrenalectomy has been done, but it is very much interventive procedure, so not done nowadays. Androgen synthesis inhibitor, aminoglutathione, not normally used nowadays. Ketoconazole, what is done? I have already shown you this this pathway, and it's blocked the 17-20 desmolase pathway. But problem of all these things is that it required the hydrocortisone for the treatment, and its side effect is a various side effect is there. So ketoconazole is not used in the first line treatment in the prostate cancer nowadays. Abiraterone, it is a inhibit the 17 alpha hydrolase and 17 and 20 lyase. It causes the increased ACTH and increased mineralocorticoids. So for this, along with it, prednisolone has been used. So it is widely used nowadays in CRPCs. Anti-androgen, the first generation is the flutamide, nilutamide, and the bicalutamide. It affects on the, it is a non-steroidal competitive androgen receptor antagonist. It has called partial agonistic activity also. It is, but it is not generally used as a monotherapy. The second generation are the enzalutamide, apalutamide, and darolutamide. Among it, the enzalutamide and apalutamide are available in India. One of the important side effects of the enzalutamide is the seizures, but it does not interfere with the corticosteroid synthesis, obviously, because it acts on the androgen receptor, not in the inhibitory pathways. Fourth, that is one of the most important inhibitor of the hypothalamo-pituitary gonadal axis. Two are important, and one is GnRH agonist. That is, it acts by the negative feedback mechanism. That is initially it causes the increased testosterone level by increased LH and testosterone from the testis, but ultimately by negative feedback mechanism, the secretion has been reduced. So during this treatment, initially some testosterone or the androgen flare is there, but in the GnRH antagonist, the aberralex, relugolix, in here there is only the suppression of the LH secretion is there, so there is no chance of the androgen flares. There is a one term is called the combined androgen blockade, where the castration, medical castration is along with anti-androgen has been used previously, but nowadays it is seen that combined androgen blockade have provided little or no benefit. Only benefit is that before going to this GnRH agonist, that is glucuronide, you must go for a more than 7 days of first generation, that is this bicalutamide or nilutamide for 14 days or 21 days, so that to prevent the androgen flare. So what are the adverse effect of it? Adverse effect is the hot flashes, sexual dysfunction, metabolic changes, gynecomastia. These are the few things, but it can be managed very easily. So next line of management, modality of management is the chemotherapy, docetaxel, mitoxantrone, and the cabazitaxel might be used. Radiopharmaceutical therapy, radium-223 is being used. Samarium and 153 and strontium-19 are also some isotope is being used in the prostate cancer, but these are used mainly in the skeletal metastasis cases. Sipuleucel-T, not available in India. It is a immunotherapy where the mechanism is that the blood containing APC, that is the dendritic cell, had harvested from the prostate cancer patient. This harvested is ultimately attacked with the prostatic acid phosphatase and the GM-CSF, which activates the APC, and it's ultimately entered into the body, and the T cell activation occur, and which then ultimately kill the cancer cell. Next, I'm going to the management according to the risk category. First is the non-metastatic prostatic cancer according to the risk category. first is the observation. When you are going to go to the observation only, in the lower intermediate risks, when the life expectancy is less than 10 years, the observation is the one of the modality. Active surveillance, very low risk group, low risk group, favorable intermediate risk group, having life expectancy more than 10 years, go for active surveillance. But local treatment by virtue of radiotherapy or radical prostatectomy should be done when unfavorable intermediate groups or higher, that is the high or very high risk group, you find out in the on investigations. Here, one important thing, incision have been mentioned that the high or very high risk group where the life expectancy is the less than 5 years and patient is the asymptomatic, you can go for only androgen deprivation therapy. Few dose schedule regarding the radiotherapy. It is when it is a low volume metastatic cancer, only the hypofractionated radiotherapy should be used. Post-op radiotherapy used when there is positive margin, seminal vesicle involvement and extracapsular extension or detectable PSA. Prophylactic nodal radiation to be considered from the unfavorable intermediate group of the patient. Now coming to this ADT, that is the androgen deprivation therapy, in the non-metastatic cases. So in when you find there is no nodal disease, in case of the unfavorable intermediate risk group, you must go for a short-term ADT, that is the 4 to 6 months of the ADT, along with the radiotherapy. High or very high risk group, go for the 4 to 6 months of the neoadjuvant ADT, followed by concurrent, along with radiotherapy, obviously, with adjuvant ADT for 1 to 3 years. One of the important modality or of treatment is the abiraterone. It is included in the N1 disease in the latest NCCN guideline, where abiraterone is used in the non-metastatic prostate cancer along with radiotherapy and ADT for near about 2 years. In PA, when you use the radical prostatectomy as a sole modality of treatment, in case of the PN1 disease, you might add ADT. But node negative disease, there is no role of adding ADT along with prostatectomy. So now what is the role of abiraterone in this prostate? I have already mentioned the N1 disease. And what is the role of docetaxel in the non-metastatic disease? Docetaxel used in the very high risk prostate cancer along with ADT, but after the completion of the RT. So this was the original case where the 16 nanogram per ml was PSA. It was seen that on investigation, the Gleason score is 4+3, T2B grade group 3. So ultimately it find that the unfavorable intermediate prostate cancer. So patient is treated with the 6 months of the ADT along with RT. Patient was kept on follow-up where the PSA every 6 months and DRE early have been done. So you might find that on the follow-up schedule, after the initial definitive therapy, there might be increase of the PSA. As on the follow-up every 6 to 12 months, you are doing this PSA and you might find some abnormal DRE. So when you will tag it as a biochemical recurrence. So what is the definition of the biochemical recurrence? This is one of the important criteria is the Fronex criteria. In the Fronex criteria, it is seen that when is PSA increased by 2 nanogram per ml or more above the PSA nadir, then you might find it is a PSA resistance or recurrence. But when you have already given a salvage local therapy, that is, for example, salvage RT or salvage surgery, you might not wait for when it's increased by the 2 nanogram per ml. Rather, when the PSA is increasing, then you might go for a further investigation of the patient. After the radical prostatectomy, in the PSA persistence of the recurrence is done, the failure of the PSA to fall the undetectable. It is seen that if it is more than even 0.2 nanogram per ml and it is increasing to succession, you might go for a further investigations. So what are the next step? Next step is the chest CT, abdominal or pelvic CT and pelvic CT, and you might go for a you might if you go for if you suspect a metastatic, you might go for a PSMA PET scan. One important thing is the PSA doubling time, that is the PSA velocity. It is the mathematical determination, the length of time needed for the PSA level to be increased. It is seen that when the BCR patient, that is the biochemical recurrent patient, when PSA doubling time is more than 9 months, it has a very good probability of the long-term survival. It is, I'm coming, why I'm telling you, I'm coming now. So if it is a PSA recurrence, it might be a castrate naive or castrate resistance. Castrate naive might be metastatic or non-metastatic. Castrate resistance might be metastatic or non-metastatic. So when you are tagged this as a castrate resistance or not, you might go for a serum testosterone. If it is less than 50 nanogram and even that PSA is increasing, so it is a castrate resistance thing. So what is that? The definition, original definition is that PSA, serum PSA failure when PSA is greater than 2 nanogram per ml, higher than that of the nadir. Along with that, the testosterone level is less than 50. Now, if you find that when it is a non-metastatic castrate naive, that is not resistance, castrate naive prostate cancer, if already EBRT is used and PSA is less than 5, you must go for a radical treatment with the radical prostatectomy or brachytherapy. If it is seen that the doubling time in less than 6 months, that is the more aggressive tumor, then ADT only, that is the androgen deprivation therapy only, is the mode of treatment. In ADT, you must choose the intermittent mode. Intermittent means that suppose the PSA is the 10 now, you have started the ADT. When PSA is 4, stop the ADT, and again you start it when the PSA again raised more than 10. So like this only, you go for the ADT. So the benefit is that in the intermittent ADT, the quality of life is better than that of the continuous one. In case of the where the radical prostatectomy used as a salvage therapy, that is initial therapy, then consider the salvage therapy when the PSA became detectable, that is more than 0.4. Now I am coming to the metastatic castrate naive prostate cancer. When you find a metastasis, but it is the castration naive, in those cases ADT should be continued. Intermittent is better than the continuous in form of the quality life, I already mentioned. Along with it, either of these drugs, that is apalutamide, abiraterone, docetaxel, and enzalutamide, might be used. Any of these drugs, all are the FDA approved. In case of the metastatic castrate naive on presentation, I am initially telling on the failure case, but on presentation, if there is a role of the radiotherapy. In which cases? In case of the low volume disease. What is the low volume disease? When there is no visceral mets and there is less than 4 bone mets is there, in those cases you can add RT. But abiraterone and docetaxel is used in case of the only high volume disease, metastatic castrate naive disease. So going some quick mechanism of the castrate resistance. The mechanism is that the prostate gland itself produces the testosterone. It is called the intratumor production of the testosterone. Along with it, there are some shunting pathways are there by which the dihydrotestosterone has been produced, bypassing the normal pathway. By this way, the castrate resistance has been occurred. So what is the treatment of the castrate resistance biochemical recurrence in the non-metastatic case? If the doubling time is less than 10 months, you might go for a apalutamide, darolutamide, enzalutamide, anyone. But abiraterone has no role in case of the non-metastatic castrate resistance prostate cancer. If it is doubling time is more than 10 months, you go for observation. If it is aggressive tumor or you might find metastasis, then you have to treat the patient. When the patient present with the metastatic castrate resistance biochemical recurrence, in those cases, you must go for a tumor testing with the MSI-H or DMMR, that is microsatellite instability present or not. So for that, you must go for a biopsy. It is seen that in case of the metastatic castrate resistance biochemical recurrence, a lot of patients will ultimately land up with a small cell or neuroendocrine tumor. In those cases, you might go for a chemotherapy with cisplatin etoposide based. If it is again some adenocarcinoma found in the prostate biopsy, then go for a abiraterone, this apalutamide, dilutamide, enzalutamide, any of it. Each and everything is FDA approved. You can also go for a systemic therapy. But one thing I have to mention regarding that, this abiraterone and enzalutamide, it is seen that when you use abiraterone first and enzalutamide second, it is more effective than when you used enzalutamide first followed by abiraterone. When you used enzalutamide first, then in the second line, it is difficult that abiraterone you might get some effect. That is, the efficacy will reduce if the enzalutamide has used first. There are some targeted therapy used nowadays. In case of the homologous, in the recombination repaired mechanism or the BRCA mutated is there, olaparib or rucaparib is used. Pembrolizumab used in case of the microsatellite high tumor. Now coming to the my last slide, that is the treatment of the skeletal events. Denosumab and the zoledronic acid, these decrease the superior in the prevention of the skeletal related event. Denosumab has a much more benefit than of zoledronic, but the rate of the hypocalcemia is the more in case of denosumab. But one thing is the cost is also high. In case of the palliative setting, palliative RT is for the bone pain, and if it is a oligometastatic disease, you can go for the local SBRT there. One of the important is the radiopharmaceutical therapy. Radium-223 is used. It is an alpha-emitting radiopharmaceutical therapy used in the castrate-resistant prostate cancer, and it also shown some survival benefit in the symptomatic bone metastasis only, but not in the visceral metastasis. Widespread bone metastasis can be palliated using the strontium-89 and samarium-93. Thank you for your kind attention.
So thank you, Kaustav. That was a nice and lucid presentation. As well, we don't have any question in the chat box as well as the question and answer session. So I think we can wind up today. Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.